All right, take a second and prepare a new quad chart. We're going to look beyond Operation Overlord after we've gotten a foothold inside of France and move on inland with Operation Market Garden and some other offensive planned by the Allies against the Germans. So our central question is, why did Operation Market Garden fail? And that'll be one of the central points of what we're talking about in this lecture. But at the beginning, after the initial invasion on D-Day and Operation Overlord is a success, we get the beach objectives held. We kind of stagnate and we stay there for about 7 weeks before we ever plan any type of breakout or are able to conduct any type of breakout of those beachheads. While it's really successful initially to get in there and hold those beaches, there was not a lot of effort pushed at or a lot of success at pushing the Germans back off until we could do a couple of things successfully. Part of it's the terrain. The hedgerows, if you've ever been to that area in Europe, are very thick. They're several feet high and several feet deep and some very, very thick branches in there. And they make great machine gun positions. So that kind of becomes a representation of what the trenches in World War I look like. So we see this battle of attrition starting very early after the D-Day operation. The first operation to break out of the beachhead actually happens pretty quick. Within a few days of D-Day, the United States had to take a city of Carentan, which is linking the area between beachheads on the beach because they were separated by some terrain. So if you remember, there were beach landing assaults all along this area, and then there was a single beach landing assault over here. This entire piece of land separated all Allied forces from coming together. So this town right here is Carentan, where you see General Bradley's army, and they had to take that first. So the Battle of Carentan is significant in that it links all of these beachheads together. If you just look at this map, it's from later, Normandy 1944, the St. Lo breakthrough. So this is toward the end of July, about 6-7 weeks after the D-Day operations. You see that the blue forces here are the U.S. forces and British and Canadian forces. Red forces are the German forces. And this line of troops is kind of all we were able to get to and push toward in that time frame. So an operation had to be planned in order to move further out of the beachhead and get the Germans on the defensive and moving further and further back into France. That operation is called Operation Cobra, and it was done at the same time as a second operation called Operation Dragoon. Now, the Dragoon was planned to happen at the same time as the D-Day operations, but weather prevented it from happening. So it happened about 7 weeks later. Operation Dragoon was taking place in the southern part of France, completely away from where our U.S. forces were in Normandy. And the idea of that was to draw German forces away to fight on a southern front and weaken them so that we could push further inland. Operation Cobra is actually the breakout that happens as we're pushing off of those beachheads. Here's a map that kind of shows it. What's interesting about this on Operation Cobra is that you see all of these heavy dark lines, and those are U.S. forces that are moving forward into German forces. And the only German counterattack is a very small counterattack that happens right up here, just on the outside of Carentan. I should go back and show you. There's another objective in here called Caen, which is up in this vicinity that the British and the Canadians are going to focus on. We use that city as a smokescreen, kind of a feint that we send troops up there to fight in there. We get the Germans to commit to that, and we're going to conduct a breakout further south where General Bradley is. And his idea is to break out quickly and then allow the infantry to link up, very similar to German blitzkrieg tactic. Here's General Omar Bradley, a future chief of staff of the Army, who was commanding all U.S. forces on the ground in that area of France at that time. We start to see, and this will become a theme, but we start to see a dissent between General Eisenhower and the British General Montgomery, where Montgomery wants a narrow approach going into the German forces to keep all Allied forces close together, kind of concentrated, a big fist punch, if you will. And Eisenhower wanted a broad offensive. He wanted to go slower across the terrain and liberate everything at the same time. And they disagree here. They disagree multiple times in the future. As we break out, we get to Paris, which is strategically insignificant to either of us, because it doesn't signify the fall of any country. We still have to continue pushing against the Germans. And initially, we actually sought to bypass Paris and just kind of cut it off because urban warfare and street-to-street, house-to-house fighting would have really increased the number of casualties that we would have taken in that area. Ultimately, we do go in and liberate it. Of course, the French are much happier than we are. We do have to do quite a bit of intense fighting in that area. The next big operation towards the end of September 1944 is Operation Market Garden. And this is really military history's greatest airborne operation. Our objective is to attack Germany on all fronts, continue their retreat. They can't bring reinforcements from the Eastern Front. They're heavily committed out there against the Russians. So Hitler, in his vow never to surrender, conscripts all these old men and very young boys with very little military experience and training into the fight. And they're completely ineffective. General Montgomery gets a great idea, and he's going to outflank this major obstacle that the Germans have put in called the Siegfried Line. And this is what the Siegfried Line looks like. These are called dragon's teeth. And on the other side of it is a big tank ditch. And all of this stuff is always overwatched by artillery and anti-tank fire. So you imagine somewhere back on this hill back here, there would be anti-tank guns pointing at these areas. Each one of these has to be individually blown up by combat engineers. It's very difficult to do. You're going to signify exactly where you're going to come into it. And once you do get a breach lane through here, when the tank comes up onto this tank ditch, its belly comes up and is completely exposed underneath, where it's the softest and most vulnerable point on a tank to that anti-tank fire from up on this hill. So it just doesn't make sense that we're going to go through here. Take a look at the size of these things. I mean, these are Willys Jeeps with people in them, and some of these dragon's teeth are bigger than that Jeep and people sitting in the back. So 5-6 feet tall, very difficult obstacle to breach. So Montgomery's plan is much better. Here's the Siegfried Line. He's going to go up through Belgium and around it and attack the Germans into their rear. And that's exactly what he tries to do with this operation. This is 2 phases of operation. Operation Market is the great airborne operation. 42,000 paratroopers in the sky, virtually at the same time. That looks like this. If you can imagine being on the ground with the air blanketed in silk, this operation, these aircraft here are C-47s, and it took 1,438 American C-47s to put these troops in the sky, in addition to 321 converted Royal Air Force bombers. Now, bombers, you can imagine, they got those bomb bay doors on the bottom, right? So when those bomb bay doors are open, the paratroopers would come out and just jump straight through the bottom of the airplane. I've never got to jump like that, but it sounds like a lot of fun to jump out of a bomb bay door on one of these great big aircraft. I have jumped out of the C-47s. They've got very small doors with a lot of equipment on, like these guys were carrying. You've got to really bend over and kind of push yourself out and into the wind stream for your parachute to open. It's a difficult aircraft to jump out of, but you can see that very effective in getting them out into the air over those drop zones during Operation Market Garden. Also in these operations were these gliders, which I call the flying coffins, because a lot of them would have people in the back and they crashed. Once they were taken up and put over the English Channel, still in friendly territory, they would fly into enemy territory and try to find a place to land. Of course, that was pre-planned, but not always in the best ways. So a lot of these did crash, and a lot of them were very nose heavy because they put equipment up in the front. I think we got a picture of one of those with a Jeep in it here in a little while. But something really interesting that I thought was honestly terrifying about these things is that they arrived into theater to Great Britain, where these guys were going to fly in on them, in crates. And the pilots and the men that were flying into them actually had to unbox them. On the inside of the box was the instructions on how to put it together. And they built these gliders before they were taken over and dropped into enemy territory. Here's the route from England across the Channel, and then they're released in. And the objectives for Operation Market Garden were Arnhem, Nijmegen, and Eindhoven. At the operation in Nijmegen initially was successful. The 82nd Airborne Division drops in paratroopers into this area. And the term that you really have to look at here is they're trying to secure key lines of communication. lines of communication, or any way that we can get things into and out of an area. So we're talking roads and bridges. And if you look at all of these explosions here, that's what they're doing. They're taking key intersections and bridges away from the Germans and trying to prevent any type of reinforcements from getting in there. Same thing happens in the vicinity of Eindhoven. They go in their gliders at this point, some paratroopers and gliders, and then they go out and they secure those lines of communication to prevent the Germans from reinforcing and counterattacking. Both Omar Bradley and General Eisenhower opposed this plan. It's too risky. They wanted to continue to apply pressure on the Germans as they retreat. Their supply lines are already difficult. Logistically, they can't supply a war on two fronts, and they thought that pressure on that would be more significant in the long run. Ultimately, Operation Market Garden, although it's recreated every year by the 82nd Airborne Division, ultimately it's a failure. It's just too optimistic. The weather's bad, and there are too many tactical shortcomings. So why did it fail? They needed 75% of objective success in order for this to be overall successful. That didn't happen. Again, we see that theme of the divided leadership between what Montgomery wanted to do and what Eisenhower wanted to do. Limited resources given to it because, again, Eisenhower was focusing on his broad front. And Arnhem, the drop zones were just too far away from their objectives, and they couldn't get in before the Germans got in and got the reinforcements in. So the bridges at Arnhem were not captured. Here's that picture of a Jeep, a Willys Jeep, coming out of the front of one of those gliders. Now, imagine how nose heavy that would be. You know, a glider flies by going down and building up speed and then kind of leveling back out. So that would have been very nose heavy. They also put artillery pieces in here and entire infantry squads sitting in the back. The Germans are against the wall, and they've got to make one final push, right? That one final push is going to happen in the Ardennes forest and is what's known broadly as the Battle of the Bulge. If you've ever watched Band of Brothers, there's a few episodes that really focuses on this. It's fantastic. It captures this really well, and I'm going to post a video of part of this battle from the Band of Brothers that you can watch along with this lecture when you're finished here. So take a look at that, and it'll kind of give you a sense of what it was like to be in some of those artillery strikes and as the Germans were coming in there. Their objective is to break through the Allied lines at a point when they're of their choosing. Here's how Hitler details out the rest of the army. The 6th Panzer Army is going to lead the attack to capture Antwerp. The 5th Panzer Army is going to kind of go right through the center and open up a lane to get them into Brussels. 7th Panzer Army is going to attack in the south to prevent any type of reinforcements from the U.S. forces that were there, and the 15th Army is held in reserve in case something happens. Here's what the Germans are going up against. I mean, we're looking at 2-to-1 Allied strength there, completely outnumbered in tanks, way outnumbered in artillery. It's really a pipe dream. But amazingly, I'm going to pull the map up here. Go back. Well, maybe I already got the map later. I'll talk about it. They push through. They find a place in the line when there was very little resistance, and they actually had a numerical superiority. They punch through. They want to break the line. They never completely break the line, but they completely encircle the 101st Airborne Division in that area in the Ardennes Forest, and then they hold them there. They had to stop because they run out of fuel. They make it about 60 miles, but they hold them there through the December months of that point in time. And I remember it being really around Christmas that these guys were isolated in a constant artillery barrage. But finally, Patton, who is located in the south where that army was supposed to prevent counterattacks, Patton, without any orders at all, sees what's going on and moves his army to the north to rescue the 101st Airborne Division. Here's the causes. We didn't know it was coming, right? Element of surprise. They attacked in an area with only 83,000 Allied troops, so they have a numerical superiority in that location, although not across the front. They had covert operations, so English-speaking German soldiers that were not wearing German uniforms go behind enemy lines. They change road signs, and they do things, conduct espionage that is really illegal in warfare because they're not uniformed members of another military. We call that spying. And then they had bad weather. So there's nothing really going there for the Germans' way. And what do you do to spies in combat, right? And I don't know how much of a practice this would be done today, but In World War II, they were pretty easily dealt with. These guys are not wearing German uniforms. You see, this one's pretty stoic. This one's pretty stoic. This guy down here looks kind of worried, looking at the other ones. Hey guys, what's going on? What are they going to do to us? Well, this is how you deal with people in World War II who are spies in combat. Immediately taken out and executed. And that's what we did to the Germans who had conducted espionage on behalf of their army behind enemy lines, or our lines, at Battle of the Bulge. Again, the 101st is completely encircled. Here's that map I was talking about. So this salient, or this bulge, extends about 60 miles at its deepest point. 101st Airborne is in here in the region of Bastogne around the Ardennes Forest. There's Patton's Third Army. He's going to, again, without orders, move to the north and break this chain of events around the 101st and essentially rescue them. Here's another look at it. And you see all these lines in red are the Germans attacking, creating that large salient. Again, never breaking through the enemy lines, which was their goal. Things may have went a little bit differently if they were able to break through the lines, but they were held off because the 101st Airborne Division was tasked with holding this critical road junction in Bastogne, and that's exactly what they did. They held it just long enough for Patton to get in there and bring reinforcements in and rescue the 101st Airborne Division. And ultimately, this signals the end for Germany. They can't continue to fight on the offensive. They've got fuel shortages. They end up abandoning equipment and continuing to run back away from the Battle of the Bulge. Here's the ultimate losses. Significant amount of losses on the Allied side. 89,000 troops is significant, but the losses on the German side are even greater. And it signals the end again of the Germans to be able to fight any more on that front. And Hitler agrees to withdraw forces on January 7th.